One island, two nations, and a border carved not by geography, but by centuries of war faith and unfinished history. On a map, Ireland appears simple, a green island sitting quietly in the North Atlantic, barely 300 miles from end to end. Yet behind that simplicity lies one of the most complex historical stories in Europe. Today, the island is divided between the Republic of Ireland in the south and Northern Ireland in the northeast, which remains part of the United Kingdom. A thin line stretching roughly 310 miles cuts through farmland villages and even city streets. But that line is far more than a border. It is the final scar of a conflict that began long before modern nations existed. Because the forces that divided Ireland were not created in a single generation. They were forged slowly across centuries through invasions, religious upheaval, colonization, famine, rebellion, and civil war. Empires came and went. Kings rose and fell. Entire societies were reshaped. Yet the question remains, how did a single island become two different worlds? Why did religion, land, and identity become so deeply intertwined that violence would erupt again and again across generations? And perhaps most importantly, after more than 1,000 years of struggle, can the wounds of history ever truly heal? To answer that, we must travel back to a time before borders, before nations, before Ireland itself had even begun to take shape. Because the story of Ireland did not begin with division. It began with a land at the edge of the known world, one that would be transformed again and again by the forces of history. Long before Ireland appeared on maps or entered the pages of written history, the island existed as a remote frontier at the far western edge of Europe, quiet, windswept, and largely unknown to the civilizations rising elsewhere. Thousands of years ago, the first human communities settled here, leaving behind only fragments of their existence, massive stone tombs, mysterious earthworks, and ancient monuments that still rise from the green Irish landscape today. These structures stand as silent witnesses to societies whose stories have been mostly lost to time. But the cultural identity that would shape Ireland for centuries truly began to emerge around the middle of the first millennium BC, when a new people arrived from continental Europe, the Celts. They brought with them a powerful cultural system built around language, mythology, warrior traditions, and a fiercely independent social order. Over generations, their customs evolved into something uniquely Irish, giving birth to what historians now call Gaelic Ireland. Yet this world was not a unified nation. Instead, the island was divided into a patchwork of small kingdoms ruled by rival chieftains, each guarding their territory and lineage with pride. Occasionally, a high king was recognized as the symbolic ruler of the entire island, but real authority remained scattered among powerful clans whose alliances shifted as often as their rivalries. Warfare between these clans was common, yet so too was a rich cultural life. Laws were preserved through oral tradition enforced by learned judges known as brehons. Poets and storytellers carried the memory of generations reciting genealogies, legends, and heroic tales that bound communities together. Spiritual life revolved around a polytheistic Celtic religion guided by druids, figures who served as priests, scholars, and keepers of sacred knowledge. For centuries, this Gaelic society thrived in relative isolation, untouched even by the expanding Roman Empire that conquered Britain just across the sea. But isolation rarely lasts forever, and beyond Ireland's horizon, forces were already gathering that would soon transform the island in ways no Gaelic king could have foreseen. For centuries, Gaelic Ireland had developed according to its own rhythm, guided by clan loyalties, oral law, and ancient spiritual traditions. But sometime between the late 4th and early 5th centuries, AD, a quiet transformation began to move across the island, one that would reshape Irish society more profoundly than any invasion. The force behind this transformation was not an army, but an idea: Christianity. Carried across the Irish Sea by missionaries and former captives, the new faith slowly began to take root among communities that had long followed Celtic pagan beliefs. At the center of this change stood a figure who would later become synonymous with Ireland itself, St. Patrick. According to tradition, Patrick had once been captured by Irish raiders as a young boy and forced into slavery on the island. After years of hardship, he escaped and returned to Britain, yet something about Ireland never left him. Driven by religious conviction, he eventually returned to the very land that had enslaved him, determined to spread the Christian message. Over the following generations, the island underwent a remarkable cultural shift. Pagan shrines gradually gave way to churches, and new religious communities emerged across the countryside. Monasteries soon became the beating intellectual heart of Ireland, where monks studied, wrote, and preserved knowledge at a time when much of Europe was struggling through political collapse after the fall of the Roman Empire. These centers of learning produced extraordinary works of art and scholarship, none more famous than the illuminated manuscript known as the Book of Kells, whose intricate designs blended Christian symbolism with ancient Celtic artistry. In an age often remembered as Europe's dark centuries, Ireland became something unexpected, a beacon of literacy and spiritual scholarship. Irish monks would even travel across the continent carrying books, teachings, and renewed faith into regions where learning had nearly disappeared. For a brief but remarkable moment in history, Ireland was known throughout Europe as the island of saints and scholars. Yet this flourishing of faith and knowledge would soon attract the attention of outsiders who came not to learn, but to plunder. Near the end of the 8th century, a new threat appeared on the horizon, one that would shatter the fragile peace of Ireland's monastic age. In the year 795 AD, Irish chronicles recorded the arrival of unfamiliar ships slicing through the cold Atlantic waters. They were long, narrow vessels with carved prows and rows of oars carrying warriors from the far north. These were the Viking seafarers from Scandinavia, whose reputation for speed and violence would soon echo across Europe. Their first targets were the monasteries that dotted Ireland's coastline. Rich with gold relics, illuminated manuscripts, and sacred treasures, these religious communities were tempting prizes for raiders seeking wealth and captives. What began as sudden coastal attacks quickly escalated into repeated incursions, leaving monks and villagers alike living in fear of the next fleet appearing beyond the mist. Yet the Vikings did not remain mere raiders for long. By the 9th and 10th centuries, they had begun to establish fortified bases along the coast, transforming seasonal attacks into permanent settlements. From these strongholds emerged something Ireland had never truly possessed before: urban centers. Ports such as Dublin, Waterford, Cork, Limerick, and Wexford grew into bustling trading hubs, linking Ireland to the wider Viking world that stretched from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean and beyond. Dublin in particular flourished, becoming one of the most important slave markets in Western Europe and a gateway connecting Ireland to vast international trade networks. Yet despite their growing influence, the Vikings never fully conquered the island. Gaelic kings retained control of the interior, and over generations the boundaries between conqueror and native began to blur. Many Norse settlers adopted Irish customs, married into Gaelic families, and gradually became known as Norse Gaels. Still, tensions simmered beneath the surface until they erupted dramatically in 1014 at the Battle of Clontarf, where the High King Brian Boru confronted Viking power in a legendary clash that would forever alter the balance of power on the island. By the 12th century, Ireland remained a land of rival kingdoms and shifting alliances, where Gaelic chiefs still dominated most of the countryside and no single ruler held lasting control over the island. Yet it was precisely this political fragmentation that opened the door to one of the most consequential turning points in Irish history. In 1169, a deposed Irish king named Diarmait MacMurrough sought military aid to reclaim his lost throne. Desperate to regain power, he turned not to neighboring clans but to warriors across the Irish Sea, Anglo-Norman knights from Britain. Among them was the ambitious commander Richard de Clare, better known as Strongbow. What began as a local dynastic dispute quickly escalated into something far greater. Armed with superior weaponry, fortified castles, and disciplined cavalry tactics, the Norman forces rapidly seized key territories in eastern Ireland. Their success alarmed the English crown. King Henry II feared that these powerful Norman lords might establish an independent kingdom beyond his authority. Determined to assert control, Henry launched his own expedition in 1171, landing in Ireland with a royal army and formally claiming dominion over parts of the island. From that moment forward, England became a permanent force in Irish affairs. Yet the conquest remained incomplete for centuries. English authority was concentrated mainly around Dublin in a fortified region known as the Pale, while much of the island beyond continued to operate under Gaelic rule. Over time, many Norman settlers themselves began adopting Irish customs language and alliances, blurring the lines between conqueror and native once again. But this uneasy balance would not last. In the 16th century, under the ambitious Tudor monarchs, the English crown launched a far more aggressive campaign to bring all of Ireland under centralized rule. Religion intensified the conflict when England broke from the Catholic Church during the Protestant Reformation, while most Irish leaders remained deeply Catholic. The final struggle came during the 9 Years' War at the end of the century, when the powerful Gaelic Lord Hugh O'Neill led a last great resistance against English expansion. Despite early victories, the Irish forces suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. Within a few years, many of Ireland's most powerful Gaelic nobles fled into exile in an event remembered as the Flight of the Earls, marking the dramatic collapse of the old Gaelic order that had shaped Ireland for more than 1,000 years. With the old Gaelic order broken and its leading nobles gone, Ireland entered a new and deeply transformative era, one defined not simply by conquest but by deliberate colonization. In the early 17th century, the English crown introduced a sweeping policy that would permanently reshape the island's social and political landscape. Known as the plantation system, it involved confiscating vast tracts of land from Irish Catholic landowners and redistributing them to Protestant settlers from England and Scotland. Nowhere was this policy more dramatic than in the northern province of Ulster. Beginning in 1609, thousands of settlers arrived, establishing new towns, farms, and fortified communities. Entire landscapes were reorganized, with Irish families displaced from lands their ancestors had held for generations. The change was not only economic, it was cultural and religious. A Protestant settler population loyal to the English crown now lived alongside a dispossessed Catholic majority, creating tensions that would echo through centuries of Irish history. Those tensions erupted violently in 1641, when Irish Catholics launched a rebellion in an attempt to reclaim their lands and resist Protestant dominance. What followed was a brutal cycle of reprisals and sectarian violence that plunged the island into chaos. Yet the most devastating chapter was still to come. In 1649, the English Puritan leader Oliver Cromwell arrived in Ireland with a determined army and a reputation for uncompromising warfare. His campaign quickly became infamous for its severity. Towns such as Drogheda and Wexford witnessed massacres that shocked even observers of the time. When the fighting finally ended, the consequences were catastrophic for Ireland's Catholic population. Vast estates were confiscated and redistributed to Cromwell's soldiers and supporters. By the 1650s, Catholics who had once owned most of Ireland's land now controlled barely 10% of it. In their place rose a powerful Protestant ruling elite known as the Protestant Ascendancy, a minority that would dominate Irish politics, land ownership, and economic life for generations. Beneath this system of power and privilege, however, resentment continued to smolder, quiet, unresolved, and waiting for the moment when it would once again ignite the island. By the late 18th century, Ireland stood at a crossroads shaped by centuries of conquest, religious division, and political inequality. Across the Atlantic and throughout Europe, revolutionary ideas about liberty and national identity were beginning to reshape the world. The American Revolution had shown that colonial rule could be challenged, while the French Revolution ignited new debates about democracy and the rights of ordinary people. These ideas did not stop at Ireland's shores. Inspired by these movements, reformers and radicals within Ireland began imagining a future where political power might belong to the Irish people themselves. In 1798, a revolutionary organization known as the United Irishmen launched an uprising seeking to end British rule and establish an independent republic. The rebellion was fierce, but ultimately unsuccessful, crushed by British forces after months of brutal fighting. Its failure convinced British leaders that tighter control over Ireland was necessary, leading to the Act of Union in 1801, which formally dissolved the Irish Parliament and merged Ireland into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. For many Irish citizens, this marked the loss of what little political autonomy remained. Yet the greatest catastrophe of the century would arrive not through politics or war, but through nature. In 1845, a devastating fungal blight struck the potato crop that millions of Irish families depended upon for survival. The result was the Great Famine, one of the most tragic episodes in Irish history. Harvests failed year after year, and with little effective relief reaching the poorest communities, starvation and disease spread rapidly. Between 1845 and 1849, roughly 1 million people died, while another million fled the island in desperate search of survival. Entire villages emptied and ships crowded with refugees crossed the Atlantic toward the United States, Canada, and Australia. Ireland's population collapsed, and a vast Irish diaspora was born. Yet alongside grief and loss came a growing political awakening. Many Irish people believed the British government had failed them during their darkest hour, and from that anger emerged a renewed determination. The demand for Irish self-government would no longer fade quietly. It would become a defining force in the decades ahead. By the early 20th century, the question that had lingered for generations could no longer be contained: who would ultimately govern Ireland. Tensions that had been building for decades erupted dramatically in April 1916 when a small group of Irish nationalists launched an armed uprising in Dublin known as the Easter Rising. Although the rebellion was swiftly crushed by British forces after several days of intense fighting, the British decision to execute the leaders transformed them into powerful symbols of sacrifice and resistance. Public opinion across Ireland shifted almost overnight, and support for independence began to surge. Within only a few years, the island was engulfed in the Irish War of Independence, a brutal guerrilla conflict fought between the Irish Republican Army and British security forces. By 1921, exhaustion on both sides and mounting international pressure forced negotiations that produced the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The agreement ended the war but introduced a compromise that would reshape Ireland's future partition. 26 counties would form the Irish Free State, gaining self-government, while remaining within the British Commonwealth, while 6 counties in the northeast chose to remain part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. What appeared to be a political solution instead created new divisions. In the South, disagreement over the treaty sparked a bitter civil war among Irish nationalists themselves. In Northern Ireland, deep tensions between Protestant Unionists and Catholic nationalists hardened into decades of political discrimination and unrest. By the late 1960s, these divisions erupted into a violent period known as the Troubles, where bombings, assassinations, and riots scarred communities for nearly 30 years. Only with the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 did a fragile peace finally emerge, opening the possibility that after centuries of conflict, Ireland might begin to imagine a different future. Today, the island of Ireland stands transformed from the centuries of conquest, famine, and conflict that once defined it. Though still divided into 2 political entities, the past few decades have brought a level of peace and cooperation that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Cities once scarred by violence, Belfast, Derry, Dublin, have become symbols of renewal, growth, and cautious reconciliation. Yet history has not vanished. It lives quietly beneath the surface, shaping identity, memory, and belonging. The question that echoes through Ireland's long story remains unresolved: will this island forever remain divided, or will the centuries of struggle eventually lead to unity? The answer, as always, belongs to the future. Ireland's story is more than the history of one island. It is a reminder of how identity, faith, land, and power can shape the destiny of entire societies for centuries. The conflicts that divided Ireland were not created in a single moment, nor were they solved overnight. They grew slowly through generations of mistrust, political decisions, and cultural divisions. Yet the progress toward peace in recent decades also reveals something powerful. Even the deepest historical wounds can begin to heal when dialogue replaces violence and communities choose coexistence over conflict. For American audiences, the lesson is clear. A nation's strength does not come from denying its past, but from confronting it honestly and learning from it. History is never just about what happened. It is about what we choose to do with its legacy. If you found this story meaningful and want more deep historical investigations like this one, make sure to like the video, share it with others who love history, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that uncover the past and challenge the way we see the present.